Hello, 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 hello. Today I'm talking with Joseph Pelrine. We talked about the silent message and helping people getting better. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello, hello everyone, and hello with me I have Joseph. Is that how I should pronounce your name?
Joseph, yes.
I kind of thought because we knew each other for quite a while. We just in the talked about it's probably around 20 years or something like that. Joseph, before we jump into questions, I also want to show us people a little bit on where we live. And for me, this is in Drongen or in Ghent. And then
Mhm.
I'm asking Google to move to
Mhm.
Almens. I don't know how to pronounce this in
Switzerland, yeah. Almans, yeah.
um,
Did you
and
find
on
it on
my
a map? Wow.
Well, Google found it for me, so I don't
Okay.
know the exact location, but yeah. Um, and what I wanted to say about that. Oh, so for me, it's about 20 minutes before 10 in the Saturday morning. What's the time on your side?
Same time zone.
Same time, because in Europe, for the people who are not from Europe, not always knowing, we do have more or less the same time zone for most parts of Europe. Not everywhere,
But
but for most parts.
Switzerland tends to be a little bit behind in certain things. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, in a way. And yeah, it in depending on how would I say it, depending on what institution it belongs to Europe or it doesn't belong to Europe,
Mhm.
and so it has a special state.
Yeah.
Indeed, that's also a nice thing.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I think the city is almost in the mountains, if I'm correct. Did you
It's
I Yeah, go ahead.
it's not a city, it's not even a village. It's a little
Hmm.
place with 200 people and 300 cows or something like that.
Wow.
And the closest neighbor is about 150 meters away from us, and,
Oh, a lot of privacy.
yes, very quiet.
And I do remember in the summer there was lots of what is it, mud problems in Switzerland. Did you had any
Um,
problems near you?
yeah, it's about 20 minutes away from where we are. We had essentially, because of the rains, so a mud avalanche coming down, and they had to evacuate one of the other villages, but there are only 80 people in that village.
So the mud chose the right village to evacuate, basically,
Yeah,
in a way.
yeah.
Um, okay, already a part of introduction. Well, Joseph, for the few people that don't know you, before we jump into the questions, could you say a little bit about who you are or what you want people to know about
This is the part I always hate
you?
about
I
doing
know,
because I don't like
sorry.
to talk about myself, but, uh, the reason that we're talking, who is agile, I don't know if I ever was agile or if I still am agile or something like that. But based on what I was doing back in the 1980s and early 90s, at the end of 1995, I got a call from Kent Beck, who was working on a project. And he said, "We're doing some crazy things and we need somebody to help us write our tooling for that." And I said, "Sure, crazy. That sounds like me." So I wrote some tooling for a project that was known as the Chrysler C3 project, which is the first extreme programming project.
Which was partially described in one of Kant's or actually in a few of his books, I would say.
Yeah. And I took over the S unit testing tool from Kent, wrote version 2 of that. And was a specialist then on the uh, configuration management and version control tools that we used in Smalltalk. And I wrote a bunch of extensions and stuff for that. And then Kent or Ron came up with the idea of, hey, if since you're such a guru on that, um, when we check code in, can you have the tests run automatically? And I said, oh,
Mm.
that's a cool idea, right? This is the interesting thing. They never said do this. They said, "Hey, what do you think about that? That's a cool idea," and just tickling your creativity. So, you know, worked on the weekend, came up with some idea that a trigger when somebody checked code into the repository that it would run all the tests automatically. And then uh, about 2 weeks later, I don't know who came up with the idea. Said, "Well, if you can trigger that, can you just trigger it to automatically build the system?" I said, "Sure."
Mm.
Took a bit longer, and you know what came out of that. But after that, I um, small talk became less popular as a language, and I became less interested in being a technical consultant. I still love programming. I still do it almost every day, but just staying at the top of the game in a language is very difficult. And I
Mhm.
found out that more interesting things were process issues and the fact that, let's say, people were saying back in the 1990s and even the early 2000s, no, you can't develop software like that. That's crazy. It
Mhm.
won't work. The thing is, it did work, but we didn't really know why. And that sort of got me into uh, a nascent science that was known as social complexity theory, which is where I met a chap named Dave Snowden back in the late 90s and went off and did a lot of work there and stuff. Um, then I got more into process, became Europe's first certified Scrum Master and certified trainer, and you profited from that way back a couple of decades ago. But then something else, a couple of things came together. I realized that the big, interesting problems were always people problems.
Mm.
And the fact that I had studied psychology back in the 1970s, and the fact that I met someone who became one of my best friends until he passed away a couple of years ago, who was an excellent psychotherapist. I met my wife, who's a psychotherapist. Uh, and a couple of these things came together. And I just, oh, another thing that happened was that I discovered that, especially in the agile world, there are a lot of people talking bullshit.
Mhm.
And I found that my bullshit meter was very finely tuned. And all of these things together caused my wife to tell me, look, why don't you go back and finish your PhD in psychology? So I went back to university and I did work in forensic psychology, lie detection,
Wow.
stuff like that, and in psycholinguistics because I've always been interested in language and communication. And so I guess I found that this was a good balance of being able to work on the technical side and on the people side.
Mhm.
And so right now on my LinkedIn profile, I say I'm a theoretically retired psychologist. Officially, I'm retired, but uh, the Rolling Stones have been doing their farewell tour for 20 years, so I don't need to stop yet. Put it like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a nice. Well, that's a really nice introduction of you, and indeed, well, like you said, I was one of yeah, I think I'm not exactly sure. I think 2005, 2006, I followed the Scrum Master
Mhm.
training with you. And ever since we've been meeting, well, especially in the first years, meeting a lot at conferences and also online. I really like a lot of your remarks because
Mhm.
you're pointing out the things like, okay, come on, this is bullshit. You say it in much nicer words,
Mhm.
but it's clear when you think something is yeah is not related to reality. Let's put it like that.
Well, you told me
And
you could cut out something if the words were too offensive, so
yeah, well,
I'm
and
speaking.
I don't worry. I don't worry about some of the words.
Yeah.
Indeed. Let's jump into that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Well, there are many things, but I interpreted that question as being someone who has influenced me.
Mm.
Back when I was very young and stupid. Now I'm old but still stupid. Um, I studied psychology in Vienna, and as a young man, I went into one of my first classes, and uh, you know, people had heard that this professor was giving this class, and were surprised that somehow I got in at that early age, and said, "Listen to that man. Listen and make sure you understand what he says."
Mm.
And I went in, and that gentleman was named Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you've ever heard of Viktor Frankl.
I
Uh,
read his book. So yeah, the man's in search of meaning. I was blown away to,
yeah,
well, with his life story and everything, thing like that.
yes, and I the one thing about Frankl was just he was so humble and so modest. Also through his history and things like that. And as I said, I was young and stupid. And I didn't know how to appreciate that gift that I had been given of being able to study with him as one of his last students. But that keeps coming back to me, and I think that's one of the biggest influences that I've had, is that I don't like to talk about myself. It's not about me, it's a subject, and just being modest and being humble, I think is a very important personality trait. And that's why I'm not online very much. I don't post much on LinkedIn. I don't like this whole "it's all about me" culture
Hmm.
stuff. Um, so that's, I guess that's one of the most powerful influences that I've had.
And if you look at, because indeed you're when you're on stage, it's never about you. It's about, yeah, the things that you're teaching or the things that you want people to know.
Mhm.
And you're also, indeed, when I was in that training, it was very clear when you said, okay, I've learned this and that, and this is from there and this is from there. It was for me also a lot of training from the back of the room before it even had a name, in a way
Mhm.
that I do remember we had to do yeah, I don't know, a daily scrum or a scrum from hell. I don't know what it was called, that
Oh, that
existed.
one, yeah.
um, but it was fun because it was about us doing stuff and
Mhm.
then giving feedback, and I assume also feedback from you. But for
Mhm.
me, it was indeed a lot about creating the environment where people could learn. That I would say.
I can't hear you. I lost the last 30 seconds.
Do you hear me now again?
Now I hear you, yes.
Okay, I don't know what happened. Okay, so I said, could you give some examples in your yeah, for other examples of how that radiates in your life or in your work?
The funny thing is, I'm very introverted.
Hmm.
Um, it was funny on your questionnaire, you wrote a question about being neurodivergent.
Hmm.
And I actually had to think of it because I was doing some research recently for a friend of mine who's doing a talk on this. And I actually found out that, oh, actually, I am neurodivergent. I never thought of myself as that. Was with
Hmm.
neurodivergence, people tend to see it as being having Asperger's or autism or ADHD or something like that. I suffer from something that's called sensory processing sensitivity, or
Okay.
highly sensitive person syndrome, which means that all my senses are turned up to 11. And a lot of
Wow.
times the world's just too much for me. I'm very introverted, but I hear the buzzes of the light. I feel micro changes in temperature, all this stuff. And I often have to retreat. And what I've had to learn to do, especially when I give a talk, when, up, when I'm up on stage, that's not me.
Hmm.
That is a persona I'm playing. That's my public persona. And there are certain zones that everyone has. This science is called proxemics. It says that we have different zones that we live in, and people know you only to the extent of a zone. And a lot of problems with interaction between people happen because they think two people think that they're in different zones. Like he thinks, oh, we're intimate already, and she thinks, oh, we're just friends. Those type of
Hmm.
things. But in order to be able to survive on stage and be able to pass on the information I have, I needed to learn this public persona. And so that's one of the biggest challenges that I've had, is just learning to protect myself there. But what you were saying, I remember doing that exercise, and I remember throwing that exercise out after a while. I didn't do it for many years because I had this feeling, and who expressed it well? Pascal von Kavenberg. I don't know if you remember him
Oh
way
yeah,
back.
I do remember him.
Pascal's, questioned. And anytime I did my trainings in Belgium, we go out to dinner and stuff. We talk about things, and Pascal said, "Why are you still doing that exercise? It's really difficult. It's really embarrassing for the person who's a scrum master, and you're putting them on the spot." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. That's irresponsible. I don't want to do exercises like that anymore."
Mm.
So I had stopped doing that one. But trying to create a place where, the saying, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach him how to fish, well, he buys a funny hat and a six pack of beer, but at least he can go out and fish by himself. Right? Just getting people to experience something by doing it themselves uh, is gives a just a better learning effect. So I guess that's it.
Hmm. I do agree with the comment from Pascal that okay, it's humiliating. At the same time, if I would encounter something similar the
Mhm.
first time I'm working as a Scrum Master and I haven't encountered in in the safe learning environment, yeah,
Mhm.
that would be even more humiliating. So
Yeah.
yeah, there is that you need to find that balance, but probably for people who've been in that very first training, it's the first, and it's I think it's in the first half day, or I don't know, it was
Yeah.
rather early. Um, yeah, the people might not feel safe enough indeed, and it might feel really like okay.
Yeah.
um and yeah, it's yeah, I do understand that feeling.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining all these extra things, because that makes
Mhm.
it for me very very valuable. Let's move to that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what would have become of you? You already gave some examples of things that you've done, but is there
Yeah.
something else that could have been you?
I don't know. Quite honestly, I've been thinking back to, if I had just gone on and done my PhD back when I was young, where would I have ended up? And I think I would have been probably comfortable as a psychology professor, uh, because I notice a lot of times if I do post something online, it's just, I'm just fed up with people who don't know what they're talking about and are inaccurate about things and stuff like that. So I guess this pedantic part of me, uh, and also my feeling that I want to pass on knowledge and help others. That's probably where I would have ended up.
um and the fact that when you say it, when you see that people are, yeah, the pedantic part, when people are bullshitting or saying
Mhm.
things that yet you
Yeah.
disagree, um how does that work as a psychologist? Is that then something you would do the same thing in a session, or is that because one way I think as a psychologist you want to show a mirror to people where they are,
Mhm.
at the same time you want also to create the trust so that they go
Mhm.
more? How does that work?
Okay. We have to differentiate here between being a psychologist and a psychotherapist,
Sorry, yeah, sorry.
right?
Oh, damn it. Oh,
So,
this is the worst mistake I can make with
yeah,
you.
no problem. In my friend Ben, the psychotherapist, once said that psychotherapy is a good psychotherapist does not only put the mirror up to someone, they bend the mirror.
Hmm.
That's one of the best metaphors I've ever heard. They bend the mirror to show someone how it could be. With me, it's challenging enough being a psychologist because when people hear you're a psychologist, normally two questions come. The first one is, can you read my mind? And I always answer that by saying, I knew you were going to ask me that.
Good,
And
yeah.
and the second question is always, are you analyzing me? And the answer to that is, only if you pay me. I have better things to do in my free time.
Okay.
But then that's why there's I have things like that publicly on my LinkedIn profile, but I normally don't tell people I did, forensic psychology and lie detection and stuff like that because that tends to kill every conversation. But that and psycholinguistics is a fascinating field, and this is what I like to do to bring stuff that's really fascinating to people, where they say, "Oh, tell me more."
Hmm.
So, uh, if we have time, let me give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
Because the
That's
I'd say the greatest ideas for a dissertation come one drunken night at university. Okay, and based on the work that I did on my master's, I had this idea about, imagine you were single and you were on a dating platform.
mm-hmm.
Now, some dating platforms, some of the better ones, do what they call psychological profiling. Right,
Mm-hmm.
it's a list of questions. You like Italian food, candlelight dinner, like long walks on the beach, and things like that. Uh, is essentially static attribute analysis. Imagine if you were on this platform and they had a chat forum. And this chat forum, you could chat anonymously with interesting people. But on this chat forum, down in the corner, you had this little meter that showed you in real time, are we getting closer or not? So that
Wow.
you can decide, should I continue this conversation or not? That's essentially what I did. So what I researched was the language that two people use in conversation and how it changes when they get to know each other better.
Okay.
So, give you a concrete example because examples are always good for this. If I say the sentence, she left it on the table, okay,
Mm-hmm.
grammatically correct in English, but you don't know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But if I tell you, hold on, I just got this message from my wife on the phone because at breakfast we put together a shopping list. And she said, well, look, since you're in an interview, I'm going to go shopping
Mm-hmm.
for the weekend. And she wrote me and said, can you tell me what's on that list? I forgot it. She left it on the table.
Mm.
So there are words that we use that work as variables in the context. Now that I've given you the context and we share that context, then you can resolve who she is, what it is, and imagine what table it is.
Exactly. Yeah, and that makes me understand or brings you more into your world and into your.
Yeah. And so what happens when people interact with each other is they tend to build a shared context.
Mhm.
And we can quantify that by analysis of these words. Uh, it's a multivariate time series analysis that has a predictive function on it. So there's a lot of maths and statistics in there, which is why I constantly program stuff. But
Mm.
I find it fascinating that you can see how one person is getting into the conversation, getting into the shared context, the other one isn't. They're using the farthest point in the other direction is using something called distancing language. Distancing language, you might remember from back in the 1990s, is incident with Bill Clinton, the American president. where when he
Hmm.
was on trial, he said, "I did not have sex with that woman."
Hmm.
With that woman is a distancing.
Yeah, it's with not using the name. It's really like, okay, it's
Yeah.
yeah, some yeah, okay.
And so this is the type of stuff I do now in my work when I come into optimized teams. These are the
Hmm.
tools that I use that I can analyze what happens with the team, what's and where are the problems by using actual real professional tools and not stuff that some guy in the internet came up with.
I really like that, and indeed, well, one of the things I've noticed and was once told by, I think it was in a coaching session, that yeah, I was talking about something, and I was talking a lot in the third person about myself instead of I,
Mhm.
and like, or you should know, or everybody, and things like that, and
Oh,
generalizing.
that's interesting. Tell me more.
And well, what I've learned in that situation was
Mhm.
that that's also a way of distancing from my own problem. Yeah,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
that's something. Yeah, that person asked me to repeat a lot of these things
Mhm.
with I as really
Mhm.
as myself as a subject,
Mhm.
and it yeah I don't remember the full details anymore, but I do remember getting frustrated, but taking
Mhm.
much more ownership of the situation after it, because
Mhm.
yeah, indeed, I was
Mhm.
taking it myself. I was taking so is that an example of these distancing and not
Yeah.
distancing things?
This is also it something that popped into mind as you were talking about it was this whole thing with Gordon's concept of I messages and you messages, right?
Mhm.
In instead of saying you hurt me, saying I feel hurt. Yeah.
Right.
And actually, I did some research on that for my PhD, but that's a dark hole to go down because essentially it only there's a lot of context around it. It's about mainly about emotions. It's mainly about negative emotions, and
Mhm.
in there are some times where if you say a compliment, say you're really cool, that's a you message, but that's positive, so it's good.
All right.
And if I tell my wife you're beautiful, that's good. But if you tell my wife you're beautiful, then you and I will have to have a talk.
Another conversation.
So that's what I mean. That's a black
Yeah, I
hole to
get
go
it.
down, and I
Yeah,
didn't do that. But
let's
this is what about it's that also it's about taking ownership
Mm.
of feelings and emotions and thoughts. Yeah,
Yeah.
instead of
And
distancing it.
and for
Yeah,
some people, sometimes depending on where we are in our life, it might not be the right moment to take ownership of the feelings, but that's
yeah,
a whole different kind of story, I think.
because it gets too close to you.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
especially if it, well, in all kind of
Mhm,
feelings, it can get too
mhm,
close. Thank you for, yeah, it's again
mhm.
uh, um, very interesting, and indeed we're touching on things that could turn into rabbit holes. So let's move to
Yeah,
that next question.
yeah.
But I really love the answers, so thank you. So for that next question, what do you consider your biggest challenge, or at least the biggest challenge at this moment, and why is that a good thing for
My biggest challenge, quite honestly, is selling myself as an introvert.
you? Mm.
I don't have any work right now. Um, so if you're interested in getting me, but
But I will
that's
let you leave the the contact details at the end for sure.
yeah. Uh,
Um,
but that's that's the thing is that you know we're in a world right now, especially in this space where the quiet voices aren't heard.
mm,
And also, the question that you had about, who should you invite next? I was thinking about quiet voices, not
mm,
about the big loud ones. And this is the big challenge because I also find the older I get, the more I learn. I guess the more scary I get for people, or something like that. But that's I think my biggest challenge. What I have been able to do I got a tip from someone, and I've actually started writing a newsletter.
Hmm.
I I really don't like writing, which is one of the reasons I probably wouldn't have been happy in academia. But started writing a newsletter and just randomly once, twice a week on these things, and I try to make it short so that you don't have to scroll too much, not too many big words, and at the end, practical things that you can take and actually use. But that's, I think that's one of the good things that's come out of it, that I've started trying to do, just take some little steps.
Hmm. And I do remember because you said you don't like writing. I do remember at some point you were thinking about writing a book or something like that. I think that
Yeah,
is it.
actually,
Was
I
was
dug
it a
up the
challenge then?
manuscripts. I dug up
Okay.
the manuscripts and said, "Now I'm on a roll. Let me take a
Okay.
look at that." And I found out, oh, I have 150 pages already. So, do I like what I wrote back then? Some of it, maybe yes, some of it no. But I'm actually working on this. But uh, I'm now at the
I'm glad
point.
to hear this,
Yeah,
because I was one of the people who was like, "Oh, I look forward to seeing that."
yeah,
But I remember that you said,
yeah.
"Well,
Well, I'll
writing
send you the link to the newsletter. You can start with that and then take a look. Okay. Yeah.
definitely." Because I was already writing down. I should add a link to the newsletter for the people
Yeah.
also in
I'll
the show
send it to
notes.
you. Yeah.
And yeah, um, it does remind me of something we talked earlier, or you talked earlier about Ken Beck, about something I've learned from Ken Beck. I don't know if he actually said it about writing, but I know he said it about writing tests. That one of the things he said is, I like to finish my day with a non-working test, so that the next day I'm immediately jumped into yeah, knowing what to do.
Hmm.
And I think he also said at some point that for writing, and that's actually something I've done with writing myself, is that so if I wanted to write a big part like a book or something like that, I set a goal at, I don't know, 500 words a day,
Hmm.
and then I stop. And typically, what happens is that by the time I stop, I still have ideas for the next day, for to keep
Yeah.
writing. And what I used to do is like, oh, I have more ideas, so I keep writing until I'm out of ideas. But then the next day, I can get started because I had no ideas. And so
Hmm.
by stopping at the limit I set to myself,
Hmm.
well, maybe it's a couple of words more, but yeah, it's not sentences more. I
Hmm.
have an idea. I might write quickly that, okay, this is the idea without more.
Hmm.
But then it's a kickstart for the next day because I
Hmm.
already know something. And by the time I finish that idea, let's say if the goal was 500 words, the next day I'm already at 250 words to write. And then
Hmm.
I'm blocked again, but I'm halfway. So then I keep working. Okay, I need to find
Yeah.
something, and by
Hmm.
the time I reach 500, I have more IDs. And so that's something
Hmm.
that helped me, because when you talk about um, writing short messages, that's actually the feeling I also had. Like, I'm not good at, yeah, don't put me into, I don't know, anywhere to keep writing full day writing. No, that doesn't work for me. Writing for
Yeah.
me is like an activity in the morning or in the evening for a
Yeah.
short amount of time, short things. Is that
Yeah.
something you've, I don't know, have
Yeah.
experience with, or?
Yeah. One thing I've really believe in is in the creative process in the subconscious
Hmm.
of you. There's the fact of forgetting your keys and then walking away and just leaving them. And your subconscious is very good at optimizing that. And then ideas will then come up. Have sleeping problems, so I'm often awake in the middle of the night. And I know yesterday I'm working on my latest newsletter and I just felt blocked. So I left it in the middle of the night. An idea came up and I went off to the loo because, sorry, we always have a stack of post-its right next to the toilet. Uh, no, not for that reason.
No, no, no. I
And
wasn't thinking about that, but I just love the idea because there's post-its everywhere in my house, I think, except
yeah,
on the toilet. I'm not sure my family will agree if I would do that,
yeah,
but it's
yeah,
that I love the idea. I love the idea.
yeah. Uh, Well, that idea came back a couple months ago where my mother-in-law passed away. And I think I actually wrote about this on LinkedIn, that
Mm,
we were confronted with everything we had to do for the funeral, and all the ideas came up. And so one of the things I did was set up a Kanban board, very simple
right.
Kanban board. But then ideas kept popping up, especially in the night because we both couldn't sleep that much. But then instead of waking each other up, we just left the pack of post-its on the loop, and then we'd write it down and go back to bed. So same thing happened. I was blocked. I couldn't think about what to. There was something missing for this for the last piece of the newsletter. So all of a sudden, it popped up in the middle of the night. I got up. I just wrote a couple words, and that's all I need. And hopefully, if I have the energy today, I'll keep going there. So this is also getting back to extreme programming, something that Kent implicitly took advantage of. I don't know if you remember way back when we had this concept of a spike solution,
Hmm.
right? And one of the rules was if you ever did a spike, you had to throw it away afterwards.
Yes, something that a lot of people don't know
Yeah.
anymore, do they?
And I remember back when I worked together with Kent, we sort of played good cop, bad cop. He would say that to management, and I would have to say, oh, he didn't really mean it like that.
Mm,
But essentially, what happens, anybody who's been a software developer knows what what the feeling is, especially if you've been around for a while, uh, of you're working on something, you try to compile something, your system crashes and takes all your code with you.
mm,
Or even if you're writing a Word document, something like, especially if you're writing something in Microsoft, right, something crashes, and then you curse, you go away, you grab a cup of coffee, you come back, and then you're only limited by how fast you can type,
hmm.
right? That's why Kant once said one of the most important skills he learned was how to type fast. But this is the subconscious helping you. You have to take a break from it.
Mm. And then then rewrite. Yeah, it's something I've also noticed, like for example when wanting to reply angry to an email or something like that, like okay, I can write it out because it needs to get out of my
Yeah.
system, then
Then
I not send it, I delete it,
delete it.
and then the next
Exactly.
day, yeah, that's what I started when I started using that. I was like, okay, I will print it, then at least I'm not lost, and then I
Mhm.
will rewrite it. But I've learned over the years that I mostly never look at that again, and then it's a lot of waste of paper. So yeah, then I prefer to indeed delete it, and then the next day
Yeah.
rewrite it in a much better way. It still
Mhm.
consisted about the same message, but it's written in a
Yeah.
more friendly
S-
way, which
yeah.
gets.
Speaking of wasted paper, how
Mhm.
many rolls of flip chart paper have you seen in offices in the corner collecting dust because right?
Oh
They're
yeah,
they're used once for a meeting. Somebody says, "Oh, we have to say that." You put them in the corner, and then they're never seen
nobody.
again. Yeah,
Yeah, it's yeah. I'm thinking. I'm looking at my corner. There's a lot of rolls there, but they're empty. So they're
yeah,
the ones I might take them. I might take pictures of them, but then it's indeed throw it
yeah.
away.
But what
Um,
happens with the pictures when you take them?
well, it's used
That's the other.
to sometimes have meeting notes or to see our
Yeah.
directions on it, and then again, well, I
Mhm.
have a hard time deleting pictures. That's a whole story on itself.
Yeah.
Uh, and indeed, I do know that yeah, pictures. I used to think, oh, that's not much, but I'm also
Mhm.
hearing that we all have collectively a lot of pictures in the cloud that actually
Mhm.
is consuming a lot of energy, and so even
Yeah.
that is not
Yeah.
healthy for our environment. So so thank you for that again extensive answer, because it's wonderful to see how you use that also in a positive way, and we'll probably get to
Mhm.
well, we do get to the invitations at the end
Mhm.
for the quiet voices and the people who are more silent. For me, it's been a cornerstone of good retrospectives is making sure that everybody gets an equal space to say stuff.
Mhm.
They don't have to if they really
Mhm.
feel like I can't contribute, but at the
Mhm.
same time they should feel like, hey, there is room for you to take,
Mhm.
and that sometimes means, well, there is less room for the loudly voices that don't
Mhm.
always like it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is important to do that.
Mm.
Let's move to that next question. What drives you? I think in many of the things you do, there is a lot of passion. You already said some things about that. Do you know where your drive or your passion is coming from?
Learning,
Hmm.
learning, understanding more about this world. I really have to be careful about getting pedantic and correcting other people
Mm-hmm.
about this. I have a low tolerance for bullshit. Uh, but one of my friends once said, people hate arguing with you. And
Hmm.
I guess in the past, I've really had to cover my ass and be careful about what I said. So I tend not to say anything unless I have evidence to back it up.
Okay.
And for an example, on this little phone here, I have over 8,000 research papers
Wow.
just to make sure, just in case. And that's it. And I've tried. I had a friend of mine who once said, instead of criticizing people, help them get better.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just complaining about them, help them correct things. I've tried to do that, but there are so many people who are so convinced of their self. The term is ignorant, arrogant, and ignorant, who don't want to listen, don't want any help. That I also, I guess, get frustrated with that. But my drive is really to learn more. I'm also at that point in my life where I find it important to pass on things I know and maybe the few things I've discovered myself onto the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some very excellent proteges. I've gotten very disappointed over the past years by younger people, and I'm sorry, I don't want to generalize about this, but I've had some bad luck with people who don't really want to take this as seriously as you and I have taken it, and others. And I guess I'm getting too old for that right now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. Just having this. There's this saying, when you get up to the top, it's your job to send the elevator back down,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I try to do. And that's my drive. That's my passion right now, passing this stuff on.
Passing this stuff on. I really like that, and yeah, it's yeah, I understand. I think both of us, we come from similar kind of places where indeed, um, I do remember feedback both on sessions and conferences and other things from you that were for me really valuable. But that doesn't mean it was always easy to hear, and I think that is,
Mhm.
but that's indeed my drive to learn, and I do recognize sometimes with other people, yeah, finding that I would, yeah, arrogant is maybe the some sometimes I have the people that people feel that they're how is it um yeah, they're like kind of, they find it normal where they are at a certain place, and
Mhm.
they have a hard time to hear feedback or get things like that. And yeah,
Mhm.
I recognize that. I'm not sure if it's indeed generation differences.
Mhm.
But yeah, I recognize that sometimes
Yeah.
it's. But thank you for sharing
Yeah.
again, because it's both parts. It's the learning and it's
Mhm.
teaching or passing on things to
Mhm.
others.
Mhm.
Indeed, where and
Yeah.
I love the metaphor of sending the elevator down and helping
Mhm.
people to get up. I think
Mhm.
as hard as that sometimes is, because
Mhm.
people. to get up.
Yeah.
Well, it is an elevator, but you still have to push the buttons and you have to work hard to get there. It's
Yeah.
not that is
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, if you fly up to the top of Mount Everest by helicopter, what have you achieved? So
Well,
what?
and still, would you survive? Because then all of a sudden you would be there with no, with less oxygen, and your
Yeah.
body would not have
No. Yeah.
adjusted to that situation, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's indeed something else. Okay, thanks there. Let's move to that next question. What do you consider your biggest achievement? And what I've noticed on this show when I talk about this, there is actually a question below that this is your moment to brag, to be really proud. Is it easier for you, Joseph, to be proud, to brag?
No, not at all. I had a lot of difficulty with this question,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll give you the quite honest answer. You know, the my biggest achievement is still being alive.
Wow. Okay.
I was diagnosed with cancer a couple of years ago. Thank God it was a false diagnosis that they weren't able to replicate, but that was really a shot that really started making me think about life and the finiteness of life and what I want to achieve in my life. And that's, I think, why this drive of passing things on right now is so important to
Mm.
me. So I
Because you see that well, you were at some point shown a shorter life than you were expecting in a way.
yeah, you know, when they say, look, it's not that bad. You have another 10 to 12 years to live.
It's not that bad still.
Right.
It's
Yeah. Yeah. But
wow.
yeah, it I remember I remember going to oncology uh,
Mhm.
at the hospital and doctor looking this is after the initial diagnosis that was done by another doctor, and he said, okay, we have to take some blood. And he went in with me to the room where they take the blood, and he had a list, you know, like this long of all the blood samples. And the lady taking blood looked at him and just said, are you serious?
Mhm.
Like 12 vials of blood.
Wow.
I had to lay down afterwards because it was, you know, it's like,
Too much blood.
too much blood. But yeah, that and then it made me really think about a lot of things. What's really important in my life. And
Mm.
yeah. So let's go on.
And but yeah, but I can imagine that when they tell you that, and it's like, wow, your whole world is shook. Um,
Yep.
and but then that next message, how easy is it to accept that next oh, we were wrong, it's a false diagnose? How does that, because do you then immediately believe the false diagnose? I can imagine that my mind would like,
Yeah.
which of the two doctors should I now believe? Like,
Yeah. Well, let's say I have no more contact with that doctor who did the wrong diagnosis.
right.
Yeah. There's you know, I've worked enough in the medical branch to know that things like that happen.
Mm.
But the way it was presented by somebody who essentially had the manners of Doctor House was not the way to
Wow.
do it. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of shows, and it's always like, would allow such yeah, ways of being treated as a patient, even
Hmm.
knowing that that would
Yeah.
probably the best to cure me? I'm not sure,
Hmm.
because it's
Hmm.
of course
Yeah.
it's a fake
Yeah.
character, but still, yeah, I can imagine, like, in
Hmm.
any profession, that there are people like that actually
Yeah.
doing the work. So yeah, it's in that
Yeah.
sense I do understand your answer, and yeah, I think
Hmm.
it is an it is an achievement for many people.
Yeah.
I never understand how people feel bad when they get old. It's like, yeah, it beats the other part. I mean, I prefer getting older
Yeah,
over dying,
yeah,
and yeah, it
mhm,
it feels very unlogical. Although I can understand that people would like to be younger or whatever, but that's a whole different kind of thing, and that's something that we know is not possible,
yeah,
or at least not now.
yeah.
So yeah, I do understand that part. Let's move to that next question. What is a personal agility tip that you have?
Oh, yes. This is a good one. This one comes from one of the books I read. It. This is, oops, where is it? Here. Early Autumn is a detective novel from one of my
Mhm.
favorite writers, Robert Parker. And I don't need to tell you much about the story there, but essentially, let's see. He, the detective, has adopted a teenage boy whose parents are being divorced, and neither of the parents want the boy. They just don't want that the other parent has him.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
so
That
he's
kind
yeah,
yeah.
so he's adopted sort of that boy, and let me just read the quote and then tell you what the aha that came to me. It says,
Mm,
"When you can, it's better to deal with possibilities than likelihoods. When you're thinking about something important which could happen, it's better to think of what the best thing would be to do if it did happen, rather than trying to decide how likely it was to happen. You can't decide whether it will happen or not. That's not up to you. You decide what to do when it happens. That's up to you. The way of living better is to make decisions you need to make based on what you can control when you can." What does this mean to me? Understand there are things that are under your control, there are things that are not under your control.
mm,
And we spend too much time trying to optimize for things that are actually not under our control. So, example, your software is always crashing. You have quality problems. What's the instinctive uh, reaction to that? Oh, we have to do more testing, right?
mhm,
No, that's wrong. That's wrong. Anybody who's ever worked in software development knows that software has bugs. And if it doesn't have bugs, it just means you haven't found them already. So what happens is that you say, oh, yeah, we're going to increase testing, but you never get around to it because you don't have the time because you're spending all the time fixing all the bugs, right?
mhm,
So if you turn this around and say, look, let's what's under control. We accept the fact that bugs happen, that shit happens. That's outside of our control. What's under our control is our response to it.
mm.
Remember, this also goes back to Viktor Frankl. Between
Yeah, I was
stimulus
thinking
and
the same thing.
response, there's a space. So, what we can do is decide how to react when these bugs happen. And once we decide how to do that, we can optimize this response plan. And by optimizing it, makes it easier for us to deal with them. And that will buy us the time to actually go and do more testing. And honestly, let's take a look at that. At the most basic level, this is what Scrum is.
Hmm.
Scrum says that a lot of shit happens. It's a complex system, blah, 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 blah. Stuff will come in unexpectedly. And Scrum has a standard way of dealing with it. Oh, we put it in the backlog, right?
Yes,
Unfortunately,
sometimes.
it doesn't go much beyond there.
Mhm,
But understanding that there are things that are in your control, things that are outside your control, and admitting that and saying, let's look at what's outside our control and say, we expect that to happen. How can we optimize our way of dealing with it?
mhm. I like it because in if also if you look at I don't know if you know the Dora metrics, but the ones who are looking for
Mhm,
DevOps, okay, what are good teams? One
mhm,
of their metrics is the mean time to recover, which is a lot like what you just said. It's like
yeah,
when shit happens, we just know that everywhere there will be shit at some point,
Yeah.
and the best teams are the ones who are able to, yeah, quickly resolve that problem. Yeah,
Hmm.
and that is something that is so crucial and preferable with
Hmm.
observability and blah blah blah. We know it before our customers know it, and we can solve it before they
Hmm.
know. But basically, that's really important. It's not just about not having bugs, it's about making sure that when shit happens, we're
Hmm.
reacting,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
very quick.
So there's that pre-step
Hmm.
before doing that, and understanding that, and not being shocked and not acting instinctively.
I like that. What we can do, how to react. Yeah. So
Yeah.
and indeed, while you were explaining, I was thinking about Viktor Frankl. I was thinking about some of the things that Dr. Covey says, and looking at these kind of
Hmm.
things, because
Hmm.
I think he was also highly inspired by Frankl as
Yeah.
well, I would say. That's a lovely tip. Thank you for bringing that up. It's really great. Let's move to that next question. Do What have you learned about remote working? I don't know how early you've been into remote working, or how that works, but what have you learned about it?
Well, most of my first remote working experience was around 2010.
Hmm.
I was working as CTO of eBay in Amsterdam, and this is one thing um, that really changed my whole view on agile and scrum and stuff like that. Was that a little volcano up in Iceland exploded,
Yes, I
and
do remember
in
that, or at least I do
Eyjafjallajökull,
remember it.
cool, yeah. And within 24 hours, it threw all transportation in Europe back a century.
Right.
I had a development team in Lviv, in the Ukraine, that couldn't get home.
Hmm.
I had a friend of mine who's a Swiss Air pilot. He was stranded. He missed his own wedding.
Wow, talking about really bad things.
Right. And then understanding then the fact that this is essentially one of the basics of the book that I'm working on is something I call the volcano effect.
Hmm.
Volcanoes are things that happen that have three characteristics. First, you can't predict them
Hmm.
coming. Second, you can't influence them coming. And third, you have to react to them. So, for you as a father, the worst possible volcano that could happen is when the hospital calls and says, your child's in the emergency room, come on down. You can't predict it happening. You can't influence it happening. You can't lock your children up, but you have to react to it. In business, we have three volcanoes. The first volcano are your customers and your clients. You can't predict what they're going to want. You can't predict changes in fashion. You can't influence it, or it's very hard to do that. One of the notable exceptions was Steve Jobs, right? But third, you have to react, otherwise you're going to lose them to go to the competition. Second volcano, your competitors. You can't predict what they're going to bring out on the market, right?
Really, no.
Second, can you influence it? Let's say that companies that are not really technologically competitive anymore try to influence it by patent suits.
Mm.
Huh? Do you remember Apple versus Samsung about how rounded the corners of phones should be?
Yeah.
Or what about Google versus Oracle, Java APIs naming,
All
those
right.
type of things?
Forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, those are companies that are not really innovative anymore that are trying to stifle the competition.
Hmm.
And third, I used to say would be laws and regulations and things like that that change, but quite honestly now just stuff like COVID. And for me, I've always said agility is the ability to respond quickly, effectively, and efficiently to volcanoes. That's it. But so that's when, I wasn't able to get to Amsterdam to work, so I worked from home and I learned a lot about there. Um, when lockdown came, when COVID came, uh, there's actually I have a talk online someplace called "Love in the Time of Corona," which is about the problems we have working remotely. And one of the quotes that influenced me most there comes from Gianpiero Petriglieri, professor at INSEAD, who's a psychiatrist and business professor. And he said, I'm looking to the side because I'm reading it off another monitor. I finally understand why everybody's so exhausted after video calls. It's the plausible deniability of each other's absence. Our minds are tricked into the idea of being together when our bodies feel that we're not. And this cognitive dissonance is exhausting.
Hmm.
That's the big challenge. And that's why, for a lot of things, I still recommend just using a phone call, stuff like that. Because I'm looking at you, you're looking at me,
Hmm.
right? I see you looking at, but are you looking at me? Or are you looking at the screen? Or are you looking at your camera? Or what are you looking at? How are our minds this? It's this cognitive dissonance. Right, on the one side, we feel, hey, we're sitting together, we can have a beer together. On the other side, we know we're not there.
Hmm.
And that's the biggest challenge is learning to deal with that. So
Yeah.
that's what this whole talk is about.
Hmm.
Um, let me see if I can find it online someplace. I'll send you the link to it.
Thank you, because indeed it looks like, yeah, and I've, for me, it's something I've, yeah, the remote work. Yeah, I have a love and hate relationship with it. It
Yeah.
allows me, like today, it allows both of us to do this conversation from home. So
Mhm.
after this talk, we will immediately go back to the people who want to go back, or to the work we want to
Mhm.
go, whatever we do, what we want to do.
Yeah.
um we don't need hours of travel, we don't need planes,
Mhm.
we can be blocked.
Mhm.
There was a big strike in airplanes just yesterday and the day before in Belgium. So I know that
Mhm.
my godfather, for example, couldn't godson couldn't get
Mhm.
back to after his holiday.
Mhm.
So people very similar to what you said, what that volcano, and then it was of course everywhere around the world. People were blocked.
Mhm.
Um, so doing this is kind of nice, but like you say, it's totally different than
Mhm.
doing things in person,
Yeah.
and finding that time.
Yeah.
I love, like, for example, what you say. Okay, you are when you're looking out to the next screen, that you explain it. Usually, we don't even do that anymore.
Mhm.
I look right into the camera because I have
Mhm.
what is it, a prompter, so I can look
Yeah.
into the camera and my screen is
Mhm.
in front. So I look at you while I
Mhm.
look at the camera.
Mhm.
But if I want to write, my computer is down there. So if I want to
Mhm.
write, hey, this is something I want to add in the show notes or whatever,
Yeah.
then that is I don't might not look completely
Yeah.
directly
It's funny. I just remember I did three versions of Love in the Time of Corona at the beginning, in the middle, and sort of at the end of lockdown. And I remember at one of them, I was doing it virtually, and I put in a slide saying, "What I, as a forensic psychologist, know about you."
to.
The fact that I can see when you're looking down at your phone, I can see the reflection in your eyes of what's actually there and stuff like that. And people got so scared that they started turning off the cameras. So I took that slide out after one time, but it was a funny experiment.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that, and
Mm.
um, yeah, it brings that whole discussion about should we turn on cameras and turn off
Yeah,
cameras and whatever.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it's interesting that when we call each other on the phone, we don't have cameras, we don't have that option,
yeah,
and somehow, like you say, it might feel that we feel more connected
yeah,
than when we see each other. When,
yeah.
yeah, indeed, because we probably might notice, hey, that person might be distracted or might be doing something else.
Mhm.
Um, I do wonder how much that is into our generation, because for example, if I look at my 16-year-old daughter, she's sending like I used to send text messages. She's sending small video chats to her friends in the
Mhm.
morning, like before
Yeah.
school. It's like a one sentence video that she sends, and she
Mhm.
gets a one sentence video back that they
Mhm.
both throw away, but it feels like
Mhm.
somehow connected over small little videos. I don't
Mhm.
know if yeah, is that we different in time and age? I don't know. How do you feel
I
about it?
yeah, it I think it unfortunately is.
Mm.
I you know, I'm really sad that a means of communication has led to so much social isolation.
Mm.
The fact that I just read a research paper about the fact that the earlier you give your child access to a phone or an iPad and stuff, the more problems they'll have then later having social contact.
Wow, that's
And
yeah.
that's scary. And
In that sense, I'm kind of happy that, well, social media only started
you
when
know,
my kids were a little bit older.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I do see the difference between my oldest son and my daughter, because there was already much
yeah,
more smartphones and things around.
yeah.
So there is things there.
Uh, so
Let's move to the books. And I'd say I normally ask for one book, but I know you have tons of books that you wanted to talk about, because well, you talked already about the 8,000 research that is on your phone, but I think you're also living in a house full of books. Am I right?
yes, we have. So my wife comes from an old noble family, and we have a big villa here with our libraries 2 floors tall. Plus, I
Mm.
have a big library in my office, plus uh, a lot of other books. So, um, did I lose you again?
No, I'm. Oh, do my
Okay,
camera?
video's just yeah. So
Interesting.
when when you wrote me this morning
Hmm.
to say, or last night and say, give me a list of books, I had the feeling that I had back when I wrote papers at university. It said, it's like, how do I get up to so many words? And the next one was,
Mm.
how do I get it down to so many words?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So one book that you probably were surprised about is this old book, the 1958 edition of the Handbook of Chemistry and Physics.
Mm.
Now, the reason for this book, my father
And
was a nuclear
I can
physicist.
I will bring. Let me see if I can bring it on. This is the version I found online. This is already the 105th edition, so that's
Yeah.
20 editions later than
Yeah.
yours.
This is the 40th edition. Right. Now, this book, my father was a nuclear physicist, and I loved it when he took me to his research lab at Princeton. And this was his book, and I can open it up, and it still smells like his research lab. And that brings back so many strong memories for me.
Mm.
And another thing that people don't know about me is his research lab was the first Unix beta site outside of AT&T.
Mm-hmm.
So another book that I have is, I had the first version of the C programming language with autographs from Uncle Dennis and Uncle Brian in it. Uh, Somehow that vanished during a move a couple years ago. But other books, I have a lot of books that I've picked up one or two ideas from. And uh, I love reading science fiction. I'm just looking books here. In terms of programming, uh, Kent Beck's Guide to Better Small Talk
Mm-hmm.
is a book not about the language itself, but about how to use the language to express things. And that's something that, okay, is special with small talk, but I just find it a very well written book. And Another book, I have a whole stack of them here. You might laugh at this, but Heinlein's Number of the Beast has an interesting uh, line in there. Whoever says or whoever thinks that they've won an argument with their partner has already lost it.
Wow, I like that idea. I like
Yeah,
that thing.
yeah. So that's those are just a couple of the books I read. I was thinking about books that will put you to sleep. A lot of
Hmm.
my statistics textbooks and things like that. But no, I'm not going to talk about those.
Yeah, while you were talking about your books, I've been trying to play around with my camera because
Mhm,
locally my video is still working, my camera is still working. For some reason, it doesn't upload it.
mhm,
So yeah, like I said in the introduction, some normally the quality is better.
mhm,
Loaded, but I fear that I might be out. We've been talking too much about not about ourselves or looking into the
mhm,
cameras.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
you
let me tell you a little anecdote about that. I was once asked to do a keynote at an internal conference of a government agency that shall not be named.
Mhm.
One of those. And uh, half an hour before the conference, I got an email from John S. is his name, and who was technical coordinator. And he, when I signed on, he was there, and I sort of asked him, "Well, John S. Is S your last name, or do you have a real name?" And he said, "Well, actually, I have one, but I could tell you it, but I have to kill you." Uh,
Okay,
and there were
that
600
kind of
people.
agency.
Yeah, that kind of government agency. There were 600 people at this conference. This is on Zoom. All of them had their cameras off and no names.
Wow,
It was like 40 pages on Zoom of black screen.
incredible.
And and me, you see it in our interaction. I live from interaction with
Hmm.
people. And just talking to this black screen was one of the scariest things I ever did, probably.
And now I make you repeat it because my camera
No,
still
it's okay.
goes
At
off.
least at least you're talking. Yeah.
So I can, yeah. About the books, because you mentioned quickly some of these books. The wait, because you talked about well, the ones from like the Ken Beck,
Mhm.
the other one. You a book that you didn't mention, but we talked already briefly about the person. I think you didn't mention Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
Um, could you say some more about that book? Because I think it's been a very influential book for me, and I think for many people. Why would people need to read that? Why would
Um, the easiest thing to say about that, just two words: read it.
Hmm.
Read it. Read it. Let it influence you. That's that's all I can say. Just read it. It's such a powerful book.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, many people that if well, he's maybe briefly talks without spoiling too much. He talks about his life in a way, but yeah, it's if you read what this man has been going through and how his reaction is, it's really wonderful. And
Yeah.
then all of the science that's behind it, that he done the
Yeah.
research and everything.
Yeah. It's just someone who survived a concentration camp like that.
Mhm.
Uh, just so
And
moving.
used it as a, I would say, as an example on
Mhm.
yeah, he could have
Yeah.
been very bitter, but he wasn't. Well, maybe he was as a person, but it definitely doesn't come across in his
Yeah.
books. But I don't think he is.
Yeah. I had another professor who wasn't that well known, who was also his wife was Jewish, and she was taken to a concentration camp, and he went freely with her so that she wouldn't be alone.
Wow,
Yeah.
that kind of things, it's always
Yeah.
shaking me. Okay, I don't seem to get the camera up and running again. I will stop it for a while and then see if it's coming back.
Mhm.
But while I'm doing that, so I want to go to that next question. What's a question do you think I should also ask you, and what's the answer?
Uh, have I been doing anything interesting recently? Um,
Mhm.
Last year, I got over one of my fears and I started working at a hospital. It's
Wow.
a mixture of working as a psychologist and working helping IT support and things like that. And it was a very interesting experience. I still don't like hospitals, but at least I know what the business is behind it. And I met someone who's also become a very good friend and very, I think, also a bit of an influence on me, who is head of anesthesiology and emergency medicine. And this guy is probably one of the coolest people I've ever met. He's from Berlin. He used to be head doctor for the emergency stuff up there, has over 8,000 ambulance uh, things and over 2,000 times out with a helicopter. And he and his wife were over once for dinner. And he was outside smoking a cigarette. And I walked out to talk with him while my wife was talking with his wife. And he said, "I heard you're uh, going off to do a talk next week. What's it about?" And I told him it's about psychological safety in teams. This is honestly psychological safety is not one of my favorite topics, but as I said, this is one of my things to drive is to get away from all the people saying bullshit about it. Well, in any case, he started talking to me about how they have to deal with that in ambulance crews. And
Wow.
he said, with us, it's totally different. We set up an environment where we have to be safe talking with each other, where it's expected and it's required. And he, there were so many things he said that, the first one was that, you know, every second counts is bullshit. In
Hmm.
medicine, every second doesn't count. If that's what you think, that's the way you think, you'll go into what Kahneman calls, your first mode thinking, which is quick and instinctive and intuitive and often wrong. So he said, with us, we have to have a method that lets us calm down and think properly about these things. And the one technique he taught me is called 10 for 10. It says, if you have a situation, the first thing you do is stop for 10 seconds. Take a deep breath, and then you're going to plan just for the next 10 minutes or until something else happens.
Wow.
And then you go on and do what you've planned. And then after 10 minutes, you take, or unless something's changed, you take a break and then you discuss your next step. The technique that they use is something called four deck. FOR means you analyze your facts, your opinions, your risks and benefits, and then you decide, you execute, and you check. And essentially, what this is just doing a mini daily scrum. Right? You take a look. Where are we right now? What do we as a team need to do? And
Hmm.
everybody has to speak. And then you do it, and then you stop and you review it and say, okay, time's up. What's the next thing we need to do? And one of the interesting things that he told me is that I have to put together a team of whoever's working on the ambulance squad right now, and we have to work as a team immediately.
Hmm.
And he says everybody knows that everybody's voice counts. So then he asked me this question, and I'm going to address the question to you and see what your answer is.
Hmm.
Imagine you're the head doctor in an ambulance crew. You get out to the place where an accident has happened, where you have an emergency. You talk to everyone, but who is the first person you ask for their opinion? Who's the first person in your team you ask for their opinion?
uh, without knowing the team, without yeah, um, I doubt between either the person with most experience or the most silent person, because
Mhm,
the most introverted person might be, or the
mhm,
junior might be tempting to follow the most senior. But in an emergency, I'm not sure if I have time for that. So
mhm.
this is the doubt I have.
It's
Uh,
it's interesting thinking. The first person to ask is the driver of the ambulance.
wow.
Think about it. That the doctor needs to know, can I get back to the hospital, or is the road blocked, or something? Is that hospital now taking patients? Do I have to call a helicopter?
Wow,
And these
you're
are the
not
type
even
of
caring about the customer. You're caring about getting back, or the patient. Yeah,
getting the patient back to care as quickly as possible,
right.
and the transportation, and then, yeah, he says, I after that, I do let the younger ones speak first,
Hmm.
uh, but it's just these type of things are the stuff that I learned working at a hospital, and I find it very, some very powerful things. And essentially, once again, this is what drives me, is this passion for learning more, and also telling people about it, passing this stuff on.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that as an idea to indeed thinking about. Basically, your that question is also about thinking about with the end in mind. Yeah, it's not just about helping out at the place of the accident or wherever you
Mhm,
are, but
mhm.
it's that last step of you getting back to the hospital, because I assume at that moment then another team is taking over, so it's that
Yeah.
last step that you need to.
And the thing is, if you can't get to the hospital, you can't get a helicopter, then you have to treat the patient differently.
Yeah, it's not about stabilizing it, it's about,
Yeah.
okay, we need to do something.
Yeah.
Wow,
And
I would
this
have
is,
never guessed that. I would have
yeah,
never guessed that.
yeah, that's the most fascinating thing. And just realizing this whole concept of CRM, not customer relations management, something crew resource management or crisis resource management, is a fascinating field. And I was recently talking to a friend of mine who's senior cabin attendant at Lufthansa, and she says, "Look, we have a week or two of training for that every year." And I
Mhm.
said, "Oh, do you have to do more because you're a senior cabin attendant?" She says, "No, everybody has to do it because maybe something will happen to me."
Of
Right?
course. Yeah,
And
you have, they can't really depend on you as a person, and
yeah,
that's
and she
wonderful.
says, I have to walk in the pre-flight briefing with a cabin crew that I've most of them have never seen before. I have 15 minutes time to make a team out of them. Right? This is the adult version of doing psychological safety. And it's totally
Yeah,
different from this. Sorry, it's totally different from all the bullshit going around. And that's the only reason I'm really talking about psychological safety. Is that, look, yeah, talk to some people who are really doing it professionally.
yeah, I love that, because it's an example I've always given, or given a lot, is that with teams, we're talking about, okay, getting to know each other, blah blah blah. But at most hospitals, most of the teams that are created are just based on schedule. And
Mhm.
what I've learned
Yeah.
from that situation, both from books and from people that I know that work in hospitals, it's
Mhm.
just like, yeah, it's the schedule that really counts, because people
Mhm.
work on different kind of things, so they hardly work in the same team. They might
Yeah.
know each other a little bit in the hospital, but if it's a large hospital with, I don't know, 150 people, the
Yeah.
chances are very slim that you work, I don't know, twice a week with the same team. So how do you create a team building team dynamics? It's just no, you have to do an operation, and you
Yeah.
have to be all feel indeed safe enough to speak up.
Yeah. And
Um,
and it doesn't happen with holding hands and singing Kumbaya after a retrospectives. Sorry.
oh, oh, thank you for that. I just hate that kind of ideas. Yeah, that for
Yeah.
me the yeah, I'm not a big fan of games in retrospectives, of gamifying it, because it's I understand we need to find other ways, but if people are not interesting in a retrospective,
Yeah.
making games or making fun of it won't make it. It needs to
Mhm.
be actions
Mhm.
need to be taken, and people need to feel safe. And most of the time, games are not helping to feel people safe.
Yes. And also the
Um,
transferability of doing team building exercises to the business world is very small,
hmm,
right? And this is one thing that I've been working on a lot over the past couple of years, doing exercises on uh, how can I optimize the way people in the team work together based on science. And this gets back to one of the questions that I often do in my talks is say, well, what does a team actually do? And you get answers like, well, they do what the boss tells them to do, or they provide shareholder value and things like that. Said, no, I want something that's quantifiable and something that's actionable.
hmm,
And a team does four things. This is based on McGrath's theory. A team does four things. First, they have to be able to come up with new ideas and bring them in and have them accepted by the team. How often has it happened that you're doing a brainstorming, somebody says something and someone else says, shut up, that's stupid, right?
yes.
Second, the team needs to have situational awareness, be aware of things that are happening around them, remember things that have happened in the past, and bring those in to help inform the team's decisions. Third, they need to be able to choose between alternatives. And fourth, they need to be able to divide up work and execute on it. And with the work that I've been doing, the tests that I've developed, I can go in and analyze with the team and say, well, if somebody says your team's not working well, I say, okay, where's the problem? Is the problem that they're not able to choose between alternatives or discussing too often and things like that, and find out exactly what to work on to optimize the
Hmm,
team. And this is one of the problems I have with all this bullshit about high performance. Most people can't even define what performance is.
right.
When I ask people, what is performance, what normally the answers that come out are not performance. They're the output or the outcome of performance. They're not what the team is actually doing. But sorry, I'm off on a rant now, so let's
No,
stop that for now.
but I love it. The especially the well, the team building for me. One of the things is that yeah, I one of my feelings about I have about team buildings is that if you don't have a team that's working already more or less as a team, then any kind of external exercises doesn't make any sense. And if it's
Mhm.
already working as a team, okay, then it might be a nice incentive and we can improve some things, but we first need to make sure that people are working as a team under the conditions that you're talking about, that you just talked about, and
Mhm.
then maybe some of the other things might bring some value, or the
Yeah,
value is just having fun. But if we don't work in these environments, then all the external team
yeah,
building activities don't bring
yeah.
anything for me. Yeah, I think we're
And
very much on that same
and
page.
to be honest, one of the things that I've learned from working as a CTO for such a long time is just the bottom line is that people are paid to do work,
Exactly.
right? You're not if you're not on an open source project, people are being paid to do work. And there are certain responsibilities that come with being paid to do something.
Yeah,
That might sound hard, that might sound not agile, but that's what business is about.
and it also means it's not just well the work, and it's also for me, it's also behaving as a decent person, because sometimes I see people behaving in a certain way that I
Yeah.
would not accept from friends or whatever. And also in the business, like, come on, just yeah, behave as a decent person.
Mhm,
You might want to give feedback or whatever, but still,
mhm.
we're yeah, we want it in a decent way, or we want it to,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
And it doesn't mean we all have to be friends at work. That's the
Mhm,
whole other kind of thing. And I
mhm.
have sometimes the feeling that companies are somewhere, yeah, either go to one side or to the other. And for me, it's yeah, It's not
mm,
about being friends. It's about doing work and collaborating, and indeed
mhm.
sometimes saying, "Hey, this is bullshit" or
Yeah.
whatever. Really wonderful answer to that question. Again, moved in all kind
Thank
of
you.
directions. Um, and yeah, I've tried a couple of things to fix the camera. Definitely, it is not going to work, so I'm going to give up. But I want to go to that last question. Who do you think I should ask next? And I do think that you have a couple of people that you had in mind. You didn't send me the list up front, so I'm now very curious
Yeah.
what will end up.
Well, this you see, this is a problem since you've been doing this essentially first in writing and stuff for so long that probably
Mhm,
most of the people I thought about immediately you've probably talked with already. Uh, and a couple of them, people who I reached out to and said, "Is it okay with you?" I said, either I've already been interviewed or I'm on his list. You know,
mhm,
uh, you know, if we're thinking about quiet voices, top of the list is Tim McKinnon, but I think you've probably already talked to him. But who people I would like to recommend are three women. Uh,
mhm,
I think that's also important to it's to get this diversity in. And the
mhm,
first is someone who's not really working directly in agile, but who is really smart when it comes to helping people get their shit together. Carrie Gucher at Cambridge did her PhD on meetings and on meeting
mm,
optimization. And she's relatively active on LinkedIn. She has a newsletter and she brings out so many good ideas about how to optimize your meetings and and how to deal with things, the shit that happens during a meeting and stuff like that. So she's one that I would recommend.
okay,
A
wonderful.
second person is a quiet voice who I'm pretty sure you don't know. Her name's Veronica Ilshizin, and she's a senior scrum master at Motorola Solutions in Krakow in Poland. And a couple years ago, I did a 4-month project with her doing this research on how to optimize the way teams work together. And
Mhm,
she's a total genius, really smart but very shy, and is a great person to talk to. And third is my dear friend Elizabeth Koschnik from Graz, who is also uh, comments occasionally on LinkedIn, but is essentially in hiding, working full time at a logistics company. And she has a lot. She's a very smart person. She's the one who I went through to prep this interview with
mm.
because she'll give me no bullshit feedback. I think those are three very valuable people.
And I just looked it up because I wasn't sure. I don't think I've interviewed Tim already, so definitely also.
I'll send you the names
Yeah,
and LinkedIn links afterwards.
thank you.
Uh,
It's interesting when you say what you said just before. You also said like, "Yeah, I'm on his list." My list is. I just opened it up to verify. I have a list of 665 people,
mhm,
from who would now like I 300. No, that's not the invite list. The 383 people have been asked, but only 191 said yes.
mhm,
Um, and for me, it's also inviting. Being on the list doesn't mean automatically that people are invited. I prefer
mhm,
people that are invited by others. I
mhm,
occasionally make an exception myself because you're one of the people that I'm invited right from the start.
mhm,
Because yeah, I thought I really would love to have that conversation. Um, but yeah, sometimes people are on my list, but I'm like, I'm sure somebody else will invite. And then
mhm,
what I see a lot is that people are, yeah, how would I say it? Are always thinking, yeah, but that person has already been invited, and then they're not
mhm,
inviting. There's a couple of people that said no. I
mhm,
think by now we're at 18 or no 17 that people That said
Yes.
no. And there's actually a lot of others that never reply.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's a little bit how it goes. And
Hmm.
like you, some people just need some time to think about it before they say yes,
Yeah.
and that's also fine. Uh,
Yeah.
it's yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think for me, we talked about safe space. For me, it's part of giving people the safe space. I might
Hmm.
occasionally remember people about, hey, the, I invited you, but I been going now. The video version has been going on for about 3 years.
Hmm.
I'm not going to ask people every week or even every month. Hey,
Yeah.
I invited you. Are you interested? I never heard something. Or
Yeah.
people who said yes and never then booked something. For me, it's like I want people to give them the time. There are
Hmm.
people that said, ask me again in a year because right now I'm very busy.
Hmm.
That I will then do.
Hmm.
Um, but that's also a part of how, for me, diversity works. It's
Hmm.
people say yes at the moment that it fits their lives, and there's no influence or very little influence that I can do
Hmm.
on who's
Yeah.
there. So thank you for inviting. Well, at least these three women. I will add Tim to the list as well
Hmm.
to invite because he's
Hmm.
yeah, an important
Yeah.
person also to have here. Thank you very much for your time, Joseph. To spend this morning, a Saturday morning, doing that, it's really wonderful. I know how yeah before you were yeah you thought about it for a long time, so I really appreciate it that you make that time.
Thanks. Yeah.
If people want to reach out to you, if they want to contact you, what do you consider best way to reaching out to you?
Um, Probably right now the easiest way is via LinkedIn. Uh,
That should be the link, if I'm correct.
yeah, and is actually what's interesting is I have a cognitive psychology test on my LinkedIn profile.
Hmm, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, when you go in and you read my profile text,
Hmm.
uh, the first sentence, please don't read it out loud. Uh,
No, no, I'm not going to do that now.
uh, it's funny how many people don't read it, but yeah, it's that, and I'll send you the link to my newsletter. Sometime I have to get around to posting the link up on LinkedIn. But of course, for me, I'm so bad at selling myself stuff that I do a newsletter. If somebody happens to sign up, okay. If not, not. So that's the way I work.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for doing that. I will add the
Yeah.
links, the things that you talked about, the books, the
Hmm.
people that you talk about, all in the show notes.
Hmm.
It's been as wonderful as I was hoping for. I hope
Hmm.
you're as happy with it as I am.
Yeah.
I'm mad at my tools at this moment.
Hmm.
I'm not sure what happened there, but okay, that's
Yeah.
again
Yeah.
it's an example of what you say. You can't really, it's another volcano, right? It's something that
Hmm.
we could not have predicted.
Hmm.
I had cameras before that turned off, but then it was the camera and I knew how to fix it. But here
Hmm.
the camera works, I can see it on my screen, but it's not
Hmm.
online, so
Yeah.
it's another
Okay.
volcano.
Okay. So thank you, and I wish you a nice weekend. Thanks for inviting me.
Same to you. I'm waving, but you can't see it here. Okay.
Okay. Bye
Thank
bye.
you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.